Welcome to this edition of the Sacred Hoops podcast. My name is Lee Palmer with Executive Director Alan Bertram and Player Development Director Brendan Boomsma. We welcome you to this edition of our podcast. Today we'll be talking about culture, but first we're going to let each of these gentlemen give a little quick introduction. Coach?
Well, first of all, I just want to say big thanks to Big Sioux Media for all the support they give to Sacred Hoops. Matt Larson today behind the scenes on our podcast. And if you guys don't, some of our viewers don't realize, Big Sioux Media does an unbelievable job of covering high school athletics here in the eastern part of South Dakota. And last night I know both you guys had playoff football games. And so just to learn more about Big Sioux Media, go to bigsiouxmedia.com. So I thank everybody for watching today.
Yeah, as Lee said, I'm Coach Boomsma, Player Development Director for Sacred Hoops. Looking forward to talking a lot different discussions with this podcast.
One of the things we also want to do is we want to give a shout out to some of our businesses that help support Sacred Hoops. So, for example, today we're going to thank Stomping Grounds in Hartford. The Lake family has been huge proponents of Sacred Hoops basketball, and we want to thank them for everything they do. So if you're looking for a great cup of coffee, stop on out in Hartford and stop out to Stomping Grounds and get your cup of coffee from them today.
Best iced coffee I've ever had.
Was it?
No, by far. Not even close.
So today we want to talk about culture. And so, Coach, I want to start with you because you've been in many leadership roles. And when we talk about culture, culture usually starts from the top. So I want to start with you. As an executive director of Sacred Hoops and a head basketball coach and a former school administrator, if you could talk about what culture means, starting from the top down.
Well, I think first of all, culture is in today's world probably the most overutilized word that you find, especially in the basketball world. You hear most every college head coach in the country talking about how they want to create their culture. And so a lot of times because a word gets overused, the meaning of it kind of gets diminished. I think culture, the most important part about culture is it drives who you are. It's basically the symbolism of this is who we are, this is what we stand for, this is who we're going to be. And culture is something that you can talk a lot about, but really culture is done through action. To me, the biggest mistake that most people make when it comes to driving or creating a culture is they spend all their time putting it up on posters and talking about it on social media, but they don't actually do what they say they're going to do. And so to me, it's about really creating a really clear vision about understanding where you want to go. And then the second part of that vision is having a plan on how to get there and then actually implementing that plan.
So as we look at that and we talk about it on the top down, as a coach and you're creating the culture for your program, you've got to get players to buy into that culture. How do you do that as a coach?
Well, the first thing you do is legitimately you have to build relationships with your kids. If kids don't really truly value you and respect you as a coach, I don't care what you put down as far as what you're going to stand for or whatever, they're not going to do it. So you really have to spend time to show the kids that you care about them, and you really have to make sure that you are putting the time and effort in with them. And once you develop that relationship, then you can go ahead and do about whatever you want. I think the biggest, most important thing is what do you want your program to look like? And I think, again, and Boom will talk a little bit about this too, I'm sure, but it's one thing to think about what I want my program to look like on the court, but it's a whole other thing to say, what do I want my program to look like off the court? Because a lot of times the off the court situation is exactly what you want your kids to symbolize on the court as well.
So, Booms, let's turn this over to you because you're not so far removed from playing as the two of us are. It's only a few years since you played at DSU and then as a grad assistant. How, as a player, what are you looking for, or what is a player's role in buying into this culture?
Yeah, when I think culture, like Coach said, it's a overutilized word, and it's that 24/7, 365 thing. So just because you're showing people what culture looks like at a game, at a practice, what are you doing outside that practice? You know what I mean? So if your word or cliche thing is all in or toughness, togetherness, are you doing that off the court? Are you doing that in the lunchroom? Are you doing that in the bus? So for me as a player, when I was looking for things, I wanted something where it was all the time. I didn't just want it on the court or when things were going good, because I think culture really deteriorates when things go bad. Mm-hmm. When things are going good, everyone has a great culture. Oh, their culture's great. They're together, all that stuff. But when things go bad, where are you at? Are you 100% all in still? Are you together? Do you have each other's back? We talked about earlier, as a player, I'm looking, okay, the head coach is the lead guy. but is the fifth assistant the same thing? Does the fifth assistant have the head coach's back? So that's one thing I look forward to, but also trying to develop those relationships with the players, or my player self trying to develop relationships with the assistant coach.
Yeah.
If I don't have a good relationship with the coach, or the coach doesn't have a good relationship with the players, is trust going to be there? So, culture is one of those things that it's a great word, it's a great idea, but it's just an idea until you actually put it in action, like you said.
Well, and I think what you said something perfect here. I think the true litmus test of your culture is what happens when something bad happens.
Yep.
Like, everyone wants bench engagement. They want this. And you can tell by walking into a gym, the saying or the wording on the shooting shirt, what their mantra is for the year. But what does all in mean? What is, what's above all mean? What does toughness mean? It's one thing to put those, again, that's my biggest problem with most programs, is it's easy to put it on a shirt. It's easy to put it on a poster, and it's easy to say this is what we're going to be. But how do you walk that walk? How do you actually symbolize it every single day in what you do in the classroom, in the hallways, in your homes? That, to me, is when you're starting to create culture. And as a coach, as a leader, you have to actually, and I said this forever, man, if you expect a kid to run a mile, you better be expecting as a coach to run 2. Yeah. So if I want a specific vision of what our culture is going to be like, I've got to actually model that 24 hours a day if I want my kids to model at 12. And so to me, it's really important. I think the second part about culture is, and this is in the business place, it can be in the athletic field, it doesn't matter. But your culture has to really show what we're going to do together. And I think one of the biggest things is, in sports especially, it's really hard to stay on that track of a collective group. It's easy for individuals to want to start thinking about, all those individual things. And your culture should really, whenever things start to happen like that, should help bring things together as a group.
Yeah, so I think, really off that is one of those things where I think there's 3 parts to it. I think you decide what you want out of it. So as a coach, we sit down as a staff, it's like, what do we want our program to be based off of, right? So togetherness, toughness, whatever it is, you decide all those things. And then you set it, right? The second step is setting it. So what are the goals we can make that culture happen? So what are the players we need in that program? What do we need to do every day, activities to make toughness happen, or whatever it is? And then third one is commit to it, put into action, commit to it, where it's one of those things where you have those 2 things going, right? Deciding and setting, but how do you commit to those actions every day?
Well, and that reminds me of that's the mantra of life. In life, if you want to make something happen, there's always 3 steps we talk about, and you just said it perfectly. But the first thing is you have to have a dream, right? So that's your vision. Your dream is your vision. The second thing is to make that dream to start to become reality, you have to start to set some specific goals. So if you got a dream and then you got goals, those are all great. But until you actually have the action that's going to allow you to get to those goals, your dream's never going to be accomplished. And so the culture is the same thing in the fact that, you've got your vision, you've got your goals, but then how are we going to get to those things? And to me, you have to constantly, and this is another big piece of advice for especially younger coaches, but just like you evaluate your team on performance and practices and games, if your culture is that big of a thing for you that you're going to have this whole persona, you got to find a way to evaluate your culture. Yeah. And then if things aren't the way they're supposed to be or not the way you like, then how do you readjust those things? How do you create new action plans? How do you, so that you can continue to be where you need to be at with that culture and how you want it to become?
And you guys have put the word commitment on there. We've heard that multiple times. In high school sports, and we've talked about this before, and we've talked about this at length, not, whether it's football field, basketball, volleyball, whatever, not everybody is 100% committed to that program, let's say. You may have a football player that's all playing basketball to stay in shape, or you have a volleyball player that, really likes volleyball, but kind of likes basketball and stuff like that. So when you're building that culture and getting that commitment as a player, first of all, how do you get everybody on board to commit to that culture?
Yeah, I think so. I think the first thing is deciding that Even it doesn't matter if you're a superstar or the worst player on the team, whatever it is. Deciding whoever gets the love, okay, it's a together thing, right? It's a love thing for the team. So if you score 30 points one night, it's not just your 30 points, it's the team's 30 points, right? I think we see a lot of discrepancy between teams and programs where they have a really good player, but he's the only one caring for himself. I put an example, like we've seen it, we followed high school basketball for forever, and we talk about it every day. I think of teams like O'Gorman and St. Thomas More Ben's boys basketball, right? So you think of the days where it was like 2010, 2011 with Coach Roby. They had Sterling Nielsen, Cedric Lang, Heaton Moffitt, 3 dudes that were good. But were the most average, 13 a game? And they didn't care.
Right.
So, and I think that preaches to what Roby did over there, because it's the same thing, this culture that we're going to buy into each other. And what is the end goal?
Yeah.
Right? And that's St. Thomas More the same way. How are they going to play? Defense. They're going to slow it down. They're going to play that way. But are the players okay with that? They obviously are.
Yeah, because they're winning
every year, right? And then you think about the player culture standpoint of, can a single-hand player affect the culture? Absolutely. I think of Tom Brady from the start of it, right? You can love or hate him, but we call it the Patriot way, and we're like, oh, what's going to happen? He goes to Tampa Bay and completely changes it. There were, people are telling stories like Antonio Brown and those guys. He walks in the room, and you're like, Tom's here. We're listening to him. So I think, like you said, Lee, how do we get that as players? Well, the best player has to get the trust from everybody, right? So you can't just be the best player and just do your own thing. But the best player leads off of and follows the head coach. Best players here, the 12th man, the ball boy, water boy, whatever it is, they're all together. So I think those are good examples. But like I said, you can love or hate Tom Brady, but that dude he walks into a room and he changes the whole atmosphere of it, right?
I agree, and I think, I've always said this as a coach. Your best players have to be willing to sacrifice. If you're not willing to sacrifice a little bit of your own personal glory for the sake of the team, your team is never going to accomplish everything that they can. It's easy for a kid who's really good, and I don't care what school you're from, you're always going to have a best player, right? And if your best player is more worried about themselves than they are the guys on the floor with them or the ladies on the floor with them, your team's never going to accomplish what they could accomplish. I think the part from the coach to be able to obtain what you talked about is you have to create an experience that seems like it's bigger than anything else in those kids' lives. If my favorite sport is football, but I'm playing boys basketball, and I create an experience around my boys basketball program that seems like it's bigger than anything I know in Del Rapids or in Tri-Valley then I don't care what my favorite is. I want to be a part of that. When we're in high school, and a lot of the parents that watch today will remember when we were in high school and when kids are in high school is your world. Like, it is your world. You live there. It's bigger than anything you know. And so you can be from a small community and think you're big time if you have a big time experience that's created for you. And so I think a lot of times what happens, and what I get a little bit upset with, is we get a lot of coaches who just end up going through the motions year in and year out. And they forget that group of kids coming in this year, this is their last experience. And I don't care if you've been coaching for 30 years or not. And so you got to find a way every year to make that experience the best experience of that kid's life and make it bigger than themselves. And if you can do that, you're going to get kids, regardless if it's their favorite sport or not, they're going to buy in. It's important.
And the cool part about that, what you just mentioned, is the best programs and the best cultures, so say, kids are excited to join.
They want to play.
Oh, yeah.
They want to play.
And they know what to expect. You know what I mean? Their first day of practice, they've heard. Right? So an 8th grader goes to a freshman, they're like, oh, we know what to expect, right? So we're trying to dive after loose balls or doing things that the coach loves because that's the culture being created. So I think that's such a cool, explanation you just had, because high school is their world, but if they also know that culture is just the same thing every year, where this is what's going to be expected, they're going to be a lot better going on forward, because they're either going to love it or they're going to get out of it and they're going to hate
absolutely.
It, right?
And I've always said this, a lot of those programs like that, when they first started, they lost more kids than they gained. Because when you're trying to recreate and rebuild a culture, especially one that was not successful, those kids have all the unsuccessful habits. That's why they were unsuccessful. So when you come in and you bring in the work ethic, the discipline, the accountability, all those things you have to have, it's not for every kid. But once you get that established and they realize what happens because of it, then you get that paradigm shift again where now the kid, I want to be there. So when you go in, you're going to lose kids but the kids you lose are kids you don't want to have because they don't want to buy into what your culture is all about.
I think the other part of it too is, and we've been in enough high school gyms, all three of us, but when you walk in and you see the third, the fourth, and the fifth grade kids buying into what's going on the floor too, you know you've developed a culture of not only just of a winning program, but of winning life skills too, because now you've got these role models that these kids say, when I get to be that age, that's what I want to do, and that's how I'm going to play as well. One last thing I want to talk about is, and we've talked about this privately, when you talk about culture, it's, okay, we've got coach, administration, the fifth assistant coach, we got the players bought in, but the kids are going home and sometimes getting a different message at home from parents. As a coach, how do you get the parents to buy in to your new culture so that I don't want to say poison pill is happening at home, but so that negativity isn't going on at home?
Well, I think first of all, most coaches who have it and are doing it right aren't afraid to have the open and honest conversations with their parents. And you have to have those conversations up front early so that the parents know exactly what you're trying to do, what you're trying to establish when it comes to your culture, when it comes to your expectations and your program. And then you have to also let them know that they need to be a part of that. Like, this is how you can help us. Because in the end, what we're trying to do is work together, coach and parent, to give this athlete the best experience possible at the high school level. And if one of us are working against that, then the only person that's going to end up losing out is the kid. But a lot of times those discussions are not had. And so then what happens is the first time something doesn't go right in the eyes of certain people, then those things start to creep in, and then that starts to chip away at your culture. It chips away at who you are and what you are, and all that work that you've tried to do can get diminished in a really quick hurry. Again, it's like what Boom said before, your players have to be bought into your culture. Well, if a player starts to not be bought in because of what they're hearing at home, then what the parents don't realize is what they're doing is they're destroying what's happening on the floor. And that separation continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then consequently, you never live up to what you're supposed to live up to. So it's unfortunate because I've seen it happen way too many times in schools and in programs. I've always said this, the number one driving factor in the success of a high school athletic team is the parents. It's the number one. And too many times it's put on coaches or athletes. You show me a program where the parents are 100% bought in and supportive, and I'll show you a program that lives up to its potential. I'm not saying you're going to win state titles because every school has this potential based off of athletic ability and skill level, but I will show you a program that lives up to its fullest potential every time.
Yeah, and I think, going off your point, I think the best thing coaches can do in that standpoint is you're seeing more and more programs do incentives in the summer, right? So how many hours they put in the summer. So you can always go back to that as a coach. If they have a problem, be like, hey, what was your son or, your daughter doing? So I think, it's one of those things where, like you said, show you a program that's going to be 100% bought in every year. It's not going to happen. Ever. It's not going to happen. But I think the quicker and the faster you can get that point across to the parents that it's their kids' lives and their kids' stat line and their kids' winning ability, all that stuff, and not theirs, I think they understand, like, oh, okay, well, maybe I should take a scale back. Because I've seen it so many times where parents want more for their kids than their own kids want for themselves. So it's like, how bad, just because, father or mother had a experience in high school that maybe they only averaged 2 a game or something, so they want their kid to be 20 points per game scores. But is that reality? Maybe not. But have their kid do it, not just them. You know what I mean? So I think the buy-in from their kid ultimately triumphs anything anyways.
Well, I've always said, this is how we'll finish today, but I've always said as a parent, you need to sit down with your athletes and find out what are their goals. And their goals have to become your goals. Your goals as a parent cannot be your kids' goals. And that's where the disconnect happens sometimes. A lot of times a parent wants their kid to be something that the kid really does not really want to be. And we all want, I've got 3 kids, we all want our kids to be the best. We all want them to do great and be successful. But they got to be great and successful at what they want. And then our job as parents is simply to support. That's it.
So with that, we will wrap up today's podcast. We want to thank you for joining us. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, along with this YouTube channel for more podcasts.